All right, in this video, we're going to go over scaffolding very quickly, which is a Ruby on Rails tool to create our CRUD action and everything that we need very, very quickly. So in the last video, we talked about CRUD, we talked about create, read, update, delete. These are the core kind of actions that we take on data. We talked about having a database and having active record models that make querying our database and dealing with our data very, very simply. We talked about controllers, which is how we route user requests and different things from the browser to manipulate the data, to read the data, to update it, etc. And then we talked about views and how the browser kind of renders stuff using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So when you're creating an application, then you need to think about what the type of data is that you're dealing with. So for example, usually we have a set of tables in our application. One very, very common table is the user table. This is a list of all the users that are signed up for an account in your application. Usually users have a handful of different columns. A very common one is email, which basically acts as the username when the person is signing in. Another very, very common one are things like a password. Maybe you have like their name in there, depending on what other type of information that you might want. Maybe you have like a phone number, etc. And you need to know what these data types usually are. For anything that's like a word, we call these strings. So all of these would be a string type data object. Phones are weird because usually you think of phones as like being a number, but you actually want it to be a string anytime you're saving a phone number to a database. A number would be something more, a number might be something more along the lines of like, maybe this would be something like, I don't know, dollars in their bank account, something just like that represents a very specific number. Or maybe this is like number of credits, right? Maybe you, anytime the user signs in, maybe anytime they send a message, you deduct a credit from their account, right? So maybe this would be like a credit, right? And then this would be like an actual like number, right? Or normally we would call this an integer or a float, depending on the different number types. So a user is a very common table. In our case with LlamaPress, we have another table that we rely on, which is called page. And essentially this page just represents a web page. And in this page, we have things like, we have our slug, which this is like a string. And it's kind of like, what does the end URL part map to? So this might be something like about, right? /about. That's like an example. Another thing that we have in page is we have something called content. And this is actually different than a string. We use something called a text. And a text field is similar to a string in the sense that it's just collecting a bunch of words, characters and spaces and things like that. But it's a much bigger version of a string where you can have many, many different, so for example, like in an HTML page, you're going to have hundreds of lines of code potentially, right? And that's actually what we do save in our content field is essentially it's HTML code. And don't confuse this with the HTML code that lives in the views folder in the Ruby on Rails application. This is a little bit of a different way of thinking about a web page where we're saving it in the database. And then when people want that, then we actually will route it and we'll return the HTML that's saved in our database. Very, very different from the other HTML usage with Rails and having it save on the file system and the views folder. Very, very different, but we're just thinking about how we're modeling an application and this page table specifically. So, this would be something along the lines of, doc type, right? And then you have like, eventually you have like this HTML tag, your content, and then HTML ends, right? So what we need to do though is, this is the underlying data representation, like a user. And in web applications, we talked about this earlier, you have these CRUD actions. You can create data, you can read it, you can update it, or you can delete it. And these are going to map to controllers and routes, right? And ultimately to our model as well. A model will represent, a row in our database. We use active record. This is all talked about in the last video. And then we also have views, and the views are going to be things like forms. It's going to be like the HTML that shows the data, styling, CSS, JavaScript, etc. So what's great about scaffolding is a way to run a single command in the terminal, and Ruby on Rails will create everything that we just talked about. It'll create the database table. It'll create a database migration, which is used to manipulate and actually create the database table. It will create the model file, the model file that is responsible for creating the active record mapping from the database to the code object. That way you can do very simple actions like user.create or user.email or user.name. So in the code, it's a very simple object that you can use to manipulate, which is much simpler than dealing with raw SQL code. It also creates the controller and the controller actions. So for the create, read, update, delete routes. And then it also creates the views as well. So you have a starting point to look at the views. So to do this, let's just jump right into it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a brand new Ruby on Rails application. So let's open up our terminal here. Let's pull this up. Okay. Go ahead and jump into my folder here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new Rails application. And the way we do that is when you're on the terminal, first make sure that you have Rails installed. So you go Rails version, perfect. And then we're going to type Rails new, and I'm going to give it the version of Rails 7.2.0. Okay. And then we give a name to the application, which in this case I'm going to call LlamaPress simple. I'm going to pass in a flag that says database equals PostgreSQL. Okay, it's actually going to be -- database, and then also the new is going to come after the 7.2.0. And the 7.2.0 is just telling Ruby on Rails that I want to create it in this specific version. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and oh, it doesn't like that. Let's try 7.2.2. There we go. Okay. So I think the only version I had was Rails 7.2. But you'll notice when I ran that command, Rails new, it created a new folder called LlamaPress, and that's the folder that's the name of the project that we gave it when we were creating this, when we ran this command. And it also creates a whole bunch of files, and it can be a little bit overwhelming at first. It creates this app folder, it creates this config folder, and it creates a test folder, and it creates some other stuff as well. It creates a README, which is very common if you've ever made projects. It creates a gem file, which is going to hold all of our libraries, like our third-party libraries that our application depends on. And the most important one is actually this app folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into our LlamaPress simple. I'm going to open up our editor. I'm using Cursor. You could use Visual Studio Code. That's totally okay. They're essentially the same thing. Okay, and we have our application here. You can see we have all of our folders. And the most important thing to point out is we have our app folder, and we have our controllers right here. We have our models right here, and we have our views right here. Right now, there's not much in there just because it's a blank application. But the next step is we're going to actually run scaffolding commands in order to get the application to do something useful for us. But before we do that, let's go ahead and just run our server. It should be as simple as just running Rails S, just like this, and it should spin right up. You see that it's listening on port 3000, 127.0.0.1. This is running locally on our computer. Let's go ahead and open a browser. Okay, we have a browser. Let's open up localhost 3000. And there we are. We have our Ruby on Rails application. So it starts with this basic Rails screen. The next step is let's go ahead and try to, well, let's just think through what's happening here. When we refresh this page, this is localhost 3000. It hits our Rails server, and you're going to see that we get these server logs. you can see that it has this started get and then slash. So this is the home kind of root, the home route. And it does this get request to this route, this URL. And you see right here, it says processing by rels welcome controller, hash index as HTML. Okay. If I were to do something like slash, let's just try some, let's say about, then you'll get an error. No route matches get about. And if we go back to our server logs, you can see that it did a get request to our slash home route. There's a routing error. No route matches get home. No route matches get about. And so what we could do is let's go ahead and look at our routes.rb. It's in our config folder right here. This is a very important file. And what it does is it defines the routes in our application. By default, Rails has this welcome controller that's actually in the gem. So you don't actually see the welcome controller code in your application that you create. But it routes there if you don't have anything else set up, such as this route path right here. But you can see right here that we have this get up and it routes to another Rails controller. So let's try that. So if we come to our browser and we go slash up, then look at that. We get a green screen, which, you know, it's just a blank HTML page. And if you look on our route here, on our logs, it says started get slash up, and it processed by the Rails health controller, hashtag show. All right. So the next thing is we actually want to, let's do our scaffolding commands. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up the terminal here that's in my editor. And let's make sure that I'm in the right directory, which I am. Let's make sure that I have Rails active. I have to source my ZSHRC file just to make sure. Let's go Rails version. Great. Now the command that we're going to run in order to scaffold things is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and look at our drawing here again. We're going to have our user table that has some fields in it. And let's start with just creating this. Let's start with creating this specific database table and all the code that we need through a scaffolding command. So what we're going to do is in the terminal, we're going to run Rails generate scaffold, and we're going to call this user, and we're going to do the singular, not plural. So we're not going to say users. We're going to say user, and then we're going to do space. And let's go ahead and look back at our referral. ChatGPT is great. It's way easier than looking at the Rails documentation. So here's the example that ChatGPT gave us. Rails generates scaffold post. So this is if someone's making a post table. And then you give it the name of the column or the attribute, so title. You give it the type, which is a string, body, text, published, Boolean. So that's how they do that example. So in our case, we're going to do Rails generate scaffold user, and then let's look at our fields here: email, password, name, phone, and credit. In this case, we're going to simplify this a little bit. Let's just start simple. Let's start with name. Our user is just going to have a name and a string. Okay, so we're just going to go Rails generate scaffold user name string. I'm going to hit enter here, and the same thing kind of happens when you first create a Rails application, which is Rails generates a bunch of files for us. So in this case, it created some files. It created this db/migrate/ date, and then create users.rb. This is basically telling, this is basically how it's going to create the database table when we run this migration for Postgres. This is also going to create, it creates our app/models/user.rb. You see here that it's an application record, which is that active record pattern that we were talking about. You see here it also created this resource route, resources users. Let's go back to our routes file that we were looking at earlier, which is in config/routes. And in here you can see it added this new line right here, resources users. And this actually creates those CRUD actions, create, read, update, delete, so that when somebody then hits the URL /users, it'll route them to the right controller. Next, you can see it created this controller action, app/controllers/users controller. You can see in here that it has our different actions. It has def index, which would be if you're trying to view all users in the database. It has this show route, which maps to get users/ID. It has this new route, which would actually bring back an HTML page with a form for somebody to fill out the information in the fields, and then they would hit submit on the form, and it would do a post request to this create controller in our Rails application. We also have a similar get/users/ID/edit. This would be for an existing user that's already created. You could fetch their record, and if you have /edit in the end of this route, it would actually create a form. It has a form already to go that would have their information in the form, so you can edit it, and then similarly you would hit submit, and it would go and it would do not a post request, but it would do a patch or a put request to our users/one ID. It also has a destroy route if we're doing a delete command to just completely destroy the record from the database, and it has some extra stuff, some kind of helper stuff, etc. There's these parameters that you do have to like add for every single column or attribute in your database table, and that's pretty much it. And that's that's how the controller works. And then the other thing is you can look, and it created this app/views/users, so it created a new folder in our views folder called users, and it has all of the HTML code that we need to get started. So it has a form, it has this underscore form.html.arb. This is known as a partial in Rails. It's basically just a partial part of an application view, and so it's just HTML code. You see it does add some Ruby code as well. Anytime you see this $% it's basically saying, it's basically just injecting Ruby into the page, and these are like Ruby and Rails kind of helpers. So you see that this is actually a helper where Rails makes it easy. You just call form with model user, and then it has some extra stuff. If, like, let's say you tried to save a database record and there was an error for any reason, then you can like display this div with a red style that basically says, hey, there are some errors that stopped this user from being saved. But it creates these for all the different actions, all the CRUD actions, and that's really, really nice. So it creates all those things. It also creates tests. It creates tests for the model. It creates tests for the controller. It creates tests for the view. It does all of that. There's some other stuff that we don't need to go into. That's the bulk, the most important things in the scaffolding. And let's go ahead and just go ahead and run our code. So let's go to our local host. Let's go /users. And we're actually going to get an error that we have a pending migration error. And what this is saying is, hey, you actually need to run this migration that was generated so that it creates the tables in the database. You can click run pending migrations. That's a new thing they've added recently. You can also go into the terminal and you can run Rails db migrate, just like this. And it will run the migration. You see it ran create users, migrating. Great, migrated. Let's come back here. Let's refresh this page. And here you can see there's users. There's no users in our database yet. Let's go ahead and add one. And you see it's a very simple form. It says new user, name, say Kody, and click create. Gives us our little success message. User was successfully created. The name is Kody. You can then edit this, or you can go back to the user's index, or you can destroy this user. One thing to point out very, very quickly is this user was successfully created. Is it called a flash notification or a notice? You see right here in our show.html.arb, it has this style, and then right here, this notice is Ruby code that gets set by the controller. Let's look at the user's controller, and this is going to be after you did a post to our create. So we had our form. It basically came and it did a get new right here. So it did get user/new. We filled out the form. We then hit submit, and it hit this create route. It created the user with the parameters that were in the form. And then in here, you'll notice that it has this if user.save. So if it successfully worked, then it gave us HTML back, took us to the user show page, and it gave us this notice that the user was successfully created. And that's what this is right here. And that's from the controller, where we're able to control little messages, little notices, things like that. And you see right here that it has notice, and that's actually how that little green notice comes up. So if we refresh this page, it goes away. Okay, one last thing. We're going to use a gem called Devise to actually set up authentication for these users. So to do this, let's go ahead and look at our gem file. Gems are just Ruby packages. So Rails is actually a gem itself. It's just basically an extension of Ruby. And you see that we have these other gems as well. PG is for Postgres. That's actually the database adapter to connect Rails to Postgres. And we have these other things. I'm not going to go too deep into any of these. If you want, you can do some more research. Nothing to really worry about, just very standard stuff. And to add a gem, you can run bundle add, and then we're going to call this is Devise. Okay. What this is going to do is it's going to come down and it's going to add this gem right here, Devise, into our gem file, and then you just run bundle and it will install everything, pull everything down, etc. Now let's go back to ChatGPT, and rather than looking up the documentation, let's be lazy and we'll say, please give me the command to install Devise for a table user in my Rails application. Okay. It's telling us to add Devise to our gem file. You can go and manually go and add Devise like that. I just chose to use bundle add. We installed it already. And then it gives us this command, Rails generate Devise install. So let's go ahead and run that command, Rails generate Devise install. Let's go ahead and see what it said here. Okay, you can see it created a couple of folders for us. Let's ignore those for now. And the next step is we're going to run Rails generate Devise user, just like this. Okay, you can see it added a new migration. And in this migration, it's actually going to add a string called email for us. It's going to add an encrypted password. It's going to give us some other stuff that's important for authentication. But the most important thing is just know that it has an email and a password field now. It also inserted this new command into our user.rb file. Basically just telling Devise that, hey, this is the model that we're doing authentication with. Let's go ahead and run our migration, Rails db migrate. Let's go ahead and refresh our page. Okay. Oh, let's bring down the app. Oh, let's get rid of users. Let's just go back to our homepage. It's saying you don't have any routes defined. Let's go back. First, okay, let's kill our server for a second. Let's go to our routes.rb, and we're gonna do something very simple. Wait, let's do root. Yeah, let's do root user/index. So this is telling Rails, just go to the user's controller and go to the user index where it's gonna show all of our users. Let's go ahead and start our server again. Let's refresh this, and we should get redirected. There we go. Okay, so if we go to localhost 3000, it takes us to our user controller right here. There's one thing that we want to do. We want to make sure that the user actually can't see anything in the application, like if they're not authenticated. So to do that, we're actually going to go into our app folder. We're going to go into our controllers. And here, we're going to go to our application controller. And we're going to say, before action, authenticate user. Okay, an authenticate user is a Devise thing that gets set up when we install Devise. And let's go ahead and refresh. And now you can see it redirected us to users/sign-in because we're not authenticated. So if I, now let's go ahead and click this sign up button. Let's go ahead and just create a user account, Kody@lawandpress.ai. Let's enter a password. It needs to be at least 6 characters. Let's click sign up, and boom, now we can we have a little flash notification, welcome, you've signed up. We can see our users. Here's the user I had created at first, Kody, and then here's the new user. Notice we didn't have a name field when we were signing up, so it didn't actually create a name for us. It also doesn't show the email or the password or anything like that. You would have to go in and modify the view controller for show. So you go show.html.arb, which is on our app/views/users. And then in here, it does render user. And that render user actually takes you to this partial right here. And what we could do is we could say, let's go ahead and let's just copy this. And let's go email. there's an email, and then user.email. This is the object, the active record object, user.email. So this is doing a SQL request under the hood. Let's go ahead and refresh this right here. And now you can see when we're looking at this user, it has name and it has email right here. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about scaffolding. We'll kind of build out some other things in the application, but we're just really going to the basics. I just want to show how quickly you can create database tables, the middle routes, the controllers, and then the actual views. Obviously, you'd still have to style these views. You'd have to modify the CSS. If you could use Tailwind, there's a way to actually initialize a Rails application so that it uses Tailwind immediately. Another simple, hacky way you can do it is if you go to the application.html.arb, you can actually come up here and you can just add in the Tailwind CLI essentially by going link. See, I was trying to do Bootstrap. Let's ask ChatGPT, what's the Tailwind CDN link? You wouldn't want to do this in production necessarily. It's pretty heavy to pull in the Tailwind, the entire Tailwind CSS file, and then also to load it remotely from the. It's not the best thing to do in a production environment, but you could just drop this script source https cdn tailwind css.com, and then what this application.html.arb file is actually this is the HTML that gets rendered on every single page in your application. So if you refresh this, notice how it changed the styling in here. And then we can actually go to that show.html.users. I'm going to use cursor here. Let's say we use Claude 3.7. And we'll say, please style this so it looks modern and nice using Tailwind. I don't know why it's. I'm just going to say Tailwind is already installed in this project. Just modify this show page. Okay. It's thinking, it's doing its thing. Okay, it just finished. I'm gonna go ahead and hit keep. Let's go back to our Rails application. Let's refresh. And look at that. We have a beautiful styled user profile. Now we'd have to go and do this for all the other views as well, but just kind of showing you how quickly it is to get something up and going. Tailwind is great. Large language models are very good with Tailwind. Tailwind is nice because it has the styling on the same place that it has the actual HTML, which is perfect for large language models when you're trying to put relevant information into the context window when you're sending a message, because then it can just add the styling, and that's great for large language models. So anyways, went a little bit longer than I hoped, but this was kind of going over scaffolding. Scaffolding is really important, especially when you're first setting up a Rails application. And I hope too that you can start to appreciate the power of Ruby on Rails, where you can create applications very quickly. This is perfect for prototypes or minimal viable products, MVPs. And yeah, it's just a really, really great framework. And there's a little bit of a learning curve, but once you kind of learn some of the nuances, you can build stuff very quickly. So in the next video, we're going to continue kind of building out on top of this project, and eventually we'll bring AI into the application. So thanks, and I'll see you there.